Is buying a M3 MacBook a good choice for a scanning computer?
The second question is also related to computer specification. We were asked if a MacBook with Apple's M3 processor would work well with the scanner. Personally, I'm a devoted iPhone user, but I've never used Apple computers. I'm only familiar with Windows system because that's all I have ever used. However, I'm sure there are some Mac users who are die-hard Apple fans and would want to purchase an Apple computer for their scanning work. So today, we will discuss this matter with Medit and give you their thoughts on scanning with Apple computers. Chen, have you ever used an Apple computer?
No, but I would like one. But you are not going to buy it for me. So why are you asking?
Oh, I was just curious. Since you use an iPhone, I thought you might have a MacBook as well. Among the Korean dentists I know, I haven't seen many using Apple computers with Magic scanners. However, based on the responses here, it seems that many users are satisfied pairing Apple computers with their Magic scanners. In fact, I can roughly estimate the performance when it comes to Intel processors based on their generations, but I can't gauge the performance level of this M3 processor. So, I looked up Medit recommended guidelines on this. On the Medit website, there are detailed recommended specs for Intel and Ryzen computers, while Apple is just mentioned as well. It seems like there won't be any compatibility issues, but it would depend on what you want the price range to be. Based on Korean prices, the specification of the MC processor mentioned by questioner is relatively expensive. It would cost as much as the high-performance Alienware laptop I recommended in question number 1. I am curious if it's worth it to buy the best Apple computer to dedicate just for scanning. Can Apple's top computers compare to other high-end computers if they cost the same? We discussed this issue with Medit, and we will share the solution video with you all.
Is buying an Apple computer a good choice for scanning purposes? While iPhones are among the top choices when considering what smartphone to buy, when buying a computer, some of you may not even consider Apple computers likely because you are not as familiar with them. If you've never used an Apple computer before, what impression or thoughts come to mind when you think of a MacBook? Perhaps there's a preconceived notion that expensive MacBooks are sleek and stylish, but their performance might be slightly lower than a Windows PC at the same price point. Today, we want to examine whether this perception is correct or completely off the mark. We are going to compare Apple computers with Windows computers from 3 different aspects related to scanning. To do so, we dug through some old posts where users shared their insights on using Apple computers for scanning. We also researched some CPU benchmarks and professional reviews to see how Apple computers perform relative to Windows PC. First, we will look at compatibility. We might think that the scanning program were designed to run optimally on Windows devices, meaning they might not run as well on an Apple device. Second, we will check to see which Apple models would allow for Medit scanners to operate at full capacity. The M3 processor is Apple's latest chip, but we will take a look at whether previous generation could do the job as well. Lastly, we will evaluate is it worth buying by looking at its cost-performance ratio. Let's start our assessment with compatibility. We found in one previous post a user who had concerns about using his MacBook with the i700. Even with the M2 Pro MacBook, which is relatively new, he had a problem with the scanning speed and mismatched occlusion. But replies to him indicate that the majority of MacBook users had no issues with scanning on a MacBook. In fact, many users switched from using a Windows device to an Apple device and are happy with this change. In another post from 1.5 years ago, someone was asking whether a MacBook was good for scanning. We had a user reply that he should go for Windows because his reasoning was the Mac version of the scanning program was still in beta. So we checked with Medity the validity of this claim as of October 2024. They replied by telling us that this is no longer the case. They have made update to the Mac version of the software so that it runs just as smoothly as the Windows version. In fact, they tested to make sure every function worked perfectly on both computers. That's why we no longer see these sorts of software complaints from our community. Next, let's assess which Apple models would be best for scanning. Medit told us that because an M2 Apple computer can handle a frame rate of 70 FPS, it is more than capable of being a designated scanning computer. This in turn means that buying an M3 or the upcoming M4 models would not have a problem at all in terms of speed. Interestingly, one user raved about his M1 Pro model with 64 gigabytes of RAM doing an amazing job and highly recommended this build. While the M1 chip is an older chip, the large amount of RAM most likely compensates for this. According to Medit's updated computer spec recommendation, we see that the lowest amount RAM they suggest is 24 gigabytes. It's important to keep this in mind, as RAM storage is crucial to keeping your scanner running optimally. So frankly speaking, the more the better when it comes to RAM, so make sure you choose a build with sufficient RAM. The last thing we will evaluate is whether buying an Apple product for scanning is worth the money. If we check the prices based on the Korean market, the M3 processor models cost just under 2,000 USD at that price point. We can buy high-end Windows alternatives, like Alienware with Intel's 13th generation processor. When checking a site that shows us some benchmarks, we see that an Apple M3 processor performs just as well as the Intel i9 13900s. It was also found that the Apple M3 chip had better power efficiency, which many Medit users could attest to because they would say that they didn't have to charge their MacBooks as often. While the M3 MacBooks are on the expensive side, when we look at some of the strength of a MacBook, it might be worth buying. There are even users that love the overall aesthetic of an Apple products in the clinic. So there are many reasons for buying a MacBook as a scanning computer if your budget allows for it. We want to wrap up this question by showing a scanning video provided by Medit. As we can see, Apple computers are now perfectly compatible with the scanning program. Although the object being scanned is dentiform, it shows that it is scanning at sufficient frame rates. So if you swear by Apple products, go with Apple. If you have an older MacBook, you might not have to buy a new one for scanning, provided that it has enough RAM. This could save your money. This has been our investigation on using Apple computers as a scanning computer. We hope this guideline helped those who are looking to buy a computer for scanning. This concludes question number 2.